Mayor's Council. Whenever I tap it, it says.
Yeah, you-
Oh, really? We don't have that.
Not well, there's certain residency is good.
Yeah. Sounds like a hush filled the room. Everybody's ready to go. Is that the deal?
YouTube goes on.
YouTube goes on. Everybody gets quiet. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to the official community plan steering committee for Tuesday, October 29th, 2024. And thank you for joining. I'm Andrew Leonard, the Mayor of Bowen Island Municipality and the chair of this committee temporarily. I'd like to start in a good way by acknowledging with gratitude that we live and work on the traditional unceded territory of the Scottish Fish. People have been stewards of these lands surrounding the Bowen Islands to time immemorial. And especially important to recognize and begin this work with some new folks in the room, and we talk about land use and planning and community development on these unceded lands. First item is approval, introduction of late items. I'll look to our clerk for any late items today. No late items, and with that, I'll look for a motion that the OCP steering committee approve the agenda for October 29th, 2024 by Mr. McCullum, seconded by Mr. Lohe. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Next up is adoption of the minutes. Are there any changes, amendments, modifications that folks on the table would like to make to the minutes of our September 13th meeting? Seeing none, I'll look for someone to minutes of the committee held September 13th be adopted. Moved by Mr. Crandall, seconded by Ms. Mason. All in favor, raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That carries. I'll look to our clerk today. Any public comments today?
I don't have anyone in the room. I'm just checking. These are all known entities.
Known entities? Okay, great. So first item on the agenda is our, pardon me? Okay, this is our kickoff meeting with the consultants. We have McElhaney here joining us today. With the Bowen Island OCP review and kickoff meeting with McElhaney. Perhaps a few folks want to join us. Colton, thank you for taking up the arts and crafts project and making your name tag. If anybody needs colored markers, I'm sure we can supply as well. With some little stars and stickers if you like. And I will turn it over to the consultants.
Great, thank you very much, Mayor. We're just getting our slides ready and the screen sharing and all of that. But very glad to be here. We're thrilled, in fact, to be here and to be working in collaboration with you to update the official community plan for Bowen Island. We just want to offer our own land acknowledgement, acknowledging that Bowen Island is located on the unceded and ancestral territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Sechelt nations. Each of the team members from McElhaney will share a little bit in terms of the delivery of the presentation. And I'll pass it over in a moment to Sandra to kind of give that overview and then a moment for some introductions. And I really want to thank those of you that were able to get through the discovery survey that we sent on Thursday. That's given us a lot of really interesting feedback that we want to reflect back to you today. And I'm sure it will lead to some fruitful discussions. Also want to thank Sophia for meeting us at the ferry and escorting us up that Jumpstart Your Heart hike up the back of Town Hall. Yeah, so how's it feeling?
I just need to be let into the Zoom meeting. Hey, there we go.
Yeah, anyhow, it was really nice to be back on the Queen of Cumberland. I affectionately call it the Queen of Cumbie. My parents are on Edinburgh Island, so we used to take that one all the time. The doors work better on it than any of the Stalish. Just do a couple more seconds and we'll be ready to go.
Maybe while we're going around the table, I don't know, I don't think we did on the last Zoom call, I don't think we did formal introductions of the committee, so maybe we can vamp here a little bit and add some constructive time. If we could just go around the table, maybe everybody could introduce themselves and just let the consultants here know what your background is and what you bring to the table.
Yeah, actually, Sandra's got it going.
Yeah, and I have a couple extra questions.
Oh, great.
So I would love to know your names. Yes, your background or your role here on the committee, but also your favorite Bowen Island moment or your favorite Bowen Island innovation. There's something that you feel is special or unique to Bowen Island, we would love to hear that. And then we'll come back to our team, we'll do some introductions, and then we'll introduce you to the rest of the McElhaney team that will be on your project as well. Who wants to kick it off?
Maybe we'll go, or just maybe we'll start. Councillor Getty.
So my name is Judy Getty. I'm a counselor in the Niles. I'm not on the committee, but I'm interested. So my favorite Bowen moment was probably moving into one of the orchard cottages and fixing it up and having that all painted in Bonet's blue and yellow. And innovation. The biggest news lately is the Cape Roger Curtis purchased by the Conservancy, so that's very, very exciting. So we'll see what we can do with that.
Yeah, full slide on that for everybody to consider that. Yep.
Tim Wake, municipal councillor, and also another member of the committee. Favorite moment was the day we moved here back in 2009, and the new home from scratch, and just fell in love with the community. And I really know we're getting to what I hope is our big innovation, which is getting our first affordable housing project actually moved.
Awesome. Thank you.
I have to apologize for being so late and not knowing what the question is.
Oh. Patients, we'd love to know who you are and your role, if that's helpful, and then your favorite Bowen Island moment or your favorite Bowen Island innovation, or both if you have.
Okay, so Kirsten Enemark, and I'm a member of the committee, the OCP committee, also chair of the community development committee. And I would say I regularly have fantastic Bowen Island moments. I love to hike, and I love to hike with dogs. I even was up early this morning hiking with dogs, and so I just feel definitely being close to nature on Bowen Island is really important. My summers, I swim in the ocean almost every day, and then I hike almost every day. So I can't think of very many Metro Vancouver places that you can do that as easily as you can do on Bowen Island. So it's very special place.
That sounds special. Great. Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Glenn Skirby, I'm a civil engineer. Yeah, similar sort of cancer week, I guess. Best moment is just moving here and Main Street to the community. It's a wonderful place to live.
Betty Morton, I arrived here about 15 years ago by other islands, and I built a house here and I was kind of waiting. I was around every day being available to the crew and exploring and realizing that there's, although Indigenous people didn't live here permanently, but there's evidence of their presence here all over the island, and just discovering that and going, oh, there's a maiden, oh, there's chips from the making tool. Oh, exciting, you know, that it's still here.
My name is Melanie Mason. I'm also on the committee. My background, I'm the general manager for the local grocery store, the Ray Potato. My favorite moment on Bowen, I think every year I love going to the Loop for the Halloween festival there. I think that's really special for Bowen. And my favorite innovation, I I was really impressed by the pilot project of the on-demand bus. I was involved with the transportation committee. Sorry, got a cold for a long time. And I thought that was a really unique project.
Okay, awesome. Oh, thank you. I see who's behind you. There we go.
Hi, I'm Councillor Allison Morris, and I'm a non-voting member of the committee. And I'm a CPA by training. And my favorite Bowen Island moment is probably sitting in my deck watching the whales. And my favorite Bowen innovation is, I don't know if it's innovation, but ever since I've been on council, since 1999, we've been wanting to build a community center. It's almost finished.
Oh. That's a very special, very special. Awesome, thank you.
I'm Steph Short. I'm your support staff for this group. My favorite Bowen moment was my friends coming to my sister's wedding in Washington, getting to the border and realizing they had the wrong passport. So barreling back to the ferry, they live in Blue Water. Someone went to their houses. We don't lock our doors, went through their house, found the passport, brought it to the ferry, gave it to someone in the lineup, put the passport across the ferry, and they picked it up in Horseshoe Bay. That only happens here. I don't know about innovation. That's on that one.
I'm Andrew. My favorite Bowen Island moment, the one that comes to mind is shortly after moving here. We moved here at the start of the school year with our son going into grade 4. We moved from East Van. We had to walk him to and from school every day, the 4 blocks, and you know, there wasn't a lot of like playing outside with the kids in the neighborhood. And within 2 weeks, we're starting at Bix. He runs into the house one day and says, "Hey, I'm going to go down and ride bikes with so and so." We're like, "Great." And he got to go out and do that, and we felt totally fine about it and totally safe. My favorite Bowen Island innovation, you know, maybe I'll just be a bit cheeky, but actually this week I've really loved seeing Councillor Morse's outfits change with the season. She had a wonderful black Halloween sweater. I'm just noticing her Halloween themed shirt today, so that's really brought a smile to my face.
That's great, thank you.
Hello, my name's Kieran Dillon. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer, started in September. So I still have a lot of innovations to create here. But my favorite Bowen Island moment was after the interview for the CAO. I stepped out and I was like, "Man, do I have enough time to go out to the golf course now?" And I went out to the Bowen Island golf course and had a wonderful 9-hole round of golf on a very sunny day. It's amazing, great. And they make really good burgers there if you're ever in the neighborhoods. And then in terms of my favorite Bowen Island innovation, it's actually the ferry tracking app, which I use every day because I'm commuting back and forth from Horseshoe Bay. And I wish we had that tool on Sunshine Coast when I was working there, but somebody had the wherewithal to come up with that here. So it's very helpful to me and also, so I think
Hey, I need that app. Thank you very much for sharing.
bowenferry.ca.
Okay, I'll look it up.
My name's Adam Loheed, also on the committee. I'm a planner at TransLink in the Transportation and Land Use Group. I'm also on the board of Birch, which is the project that Tim mentioned earlier, at golf course. Favorite moment, I think I'll go hiking and swimming too, collectively. And innovation, I'm gonna go with Peter King's now retired commuter shuttle, which I'm a little biased, but it was great service and brought Bowen commuters into the city and back every day.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for sharing.
I'm James Crandall. I also go by I usually go by Jim. I am a retired planner. I was the director of planning for the Port Authority for many years. I've been at Bowen Island. Let's see, I don't know if the word resident. I have owned a property on Bowen Island since 2010. And my favorite Bowen moment was discovering what it meant to be a townie. And then my proudest moment was when I became a resident. So during the pandemic, worked from home, realized that I can actually live here and I don't feel like I'm isolated on an island. And so that's a big important way that I became president. Innovation, I don't have one right now. Something will come to mind eventually.
Well, when it does, please share. Awesome, thank you.
I'm David McCullen. We moved here in 1993. And I'm a computer nerd and spend a bunch of my time on Bowen nonprofits, including Birch with Adam. My favorite Bowen moment is coming up. It's Remembrance Day every year. This community gathers. Sorry, I should back up. When I introduce somebody to our community, I tell them this is a community that will fight to the death over anything. Doesn't matter what the idea is, that side will be for and will be against, and it goes on and on. But Remembrance Day, we don't argue about. And with the term, it's a lovely gathering and ceremony. The weather always improves. It's quite something. And actually, I'm going to steal Adam's as well. The innovation is that Bowen Ferry website. It's fantastic. And I still can't believe BC Ferries hasn't stolen it or bought it and ruined it in some way.
Yeah, you're already taking notes of there. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for sharing.
Welcome, Chana Pelpula. I work in the environmental and social world for tech resources. I direct their community and Indigenous affairs for tech. I'm on the committee. Favorite Bowen moment is actually enduring. So we moved here as a part-time resident 11 years ago. We bought our first home. We were welcomed into the community in such a loving way. But those sort of moments in time cease to exist. Like they just continue on. So it's a continuum of what we call the good neighbors that we have. Everything from getting a card from one of our neighbors who parents of an acquaintance, we have mistakenly been shoveling their neighbor's driveway for years. And they sent us finally a card acknowledging, thank you for shoveling the neighbor's driveway. Yeah, so that's just the kind of community we have here. We all look out for each other and help each other. And innovation, I think Melanie brought up a really great one. And then building on Melanie and Adams, I think it's the future innovation on transport. The pilot project on the bus was incredible. The app to help us sort of plan our day, but then the innovation coming forward is the continuation of the Bowen walk-on passenger ferry, and seeing that comes to fruition.
Awesome. Thank you very much for sharing. Yeah, no.
Sure. So I'm Daniel Martin. I'm the manager of planning and development here on Bowen. I think my favorite Bowen Island moment, maybe or a favorite Bowen Island moment happened recently. So when we moved here in 2015, we lived in a secondary suite on Keats Hill, which is just above the Muni here. And we moved, I think about 7 years ago, we moved, and the house has changed owners a couple times. And recently somebody sent me a package and they sent it to our old address on Seaview, and it got delivered there. And the person crossed out the address and wrote, "Works at BIM?" ? And kind of posthumously took it from that and brought it down. My office here.
That's helpful. I'm Sophia. Understand by one. Kind of hard to think of a favorite moment. Maybe laying on my aunt and uncle's deck every summer and just staring at the stars. You can really see the stars here that you just don't get anywhere else. So that's still a very favorite memory. That sounds pretty awesome. Yeah. And judging by the nods and the in the room, it's maybe also shared and appreciated. So that's very cool. Thank you.
And obviously we have Fritz.
Oh, yes. I would love to go to our folks who are joining us remotely.
Is it my turn? Okay.
Please.
All right. When I'm working on my computer from Bowen Island, where I'm not at this moment, what I always like is that deer that sits there on the rock, just staring at me, and just monitoring how I'm proceeding with my work. But it's kind of nice because you never feel alone, right? Then for innovation, I think that I pick birds for the recycling because they always come up with something new. I've never seen anybody or any recycling facility that is as effective, but also is kind of like the lounge in the of the ferry is kind of also a very important link where people meet. Now, I don't know if you noticed that, but when I go there, you always meet the same people because there seems to be recycling at the same time. So I recommend that every once in a while you change your recycling schedule.
Awesome. Thank
The
you for
other one
sharing
is
this.
maybe Remembrance Day. I'm always by awe how many people show up and how you get that sense of community.
Sounds like a very special moment here.
Thanks, Chris.
Is there anyone online that I can't see?
Yes, there's Councillor Jurgensen. Are you there? Are you able to see what we're doing today?
Absolutely. So thank you. My name is Alex Jurgensen. I'm a counselor with Bowen Island Municipality as well as a non-voting member of this committee. I'd have to say probably my favorite Bowen moment. It's a hard one, but I think it probably has to come down to a continuum of moments where just I'm always awed by this community's acceptance towards finding people and just treating them like normal human beings, which I think is probably I'd have to put that in the innovation category as well. Just because I've traveled a lot of communities and I've by far have found this to be the most welcoming community. Yeah, that's I guess what I have to say.
That sounds lovely. Thank you very much for sharing that. So I'd like to walk through a little bit of what we'll do today, and then we'll actually introduce our McElhaney team. We will write our name tags on our when we get a moment here. So we're just gonna back up a little bit. So we have some information that is just a little snapshot of your community profile. And then we'll talk about this survey that we did. We will not go through question by question, but we'll talk about some of the themes and how we use that survey in the work that we do going forward. We'll go through the project work plan and the schedule, the flow of communication, what our next steps are after this meeting, and then we'll open the floor for questions. Anything that comes up for you during the meeting, please feel free to ask us in the moment. We don't want you to forget your question or for us to lose the context, but if there are questions at the end, we're happy to chat with those as well. Also, I have a hearing disability, so sometimes it can be really tough for me to hear the folks at the far end of the room, especially if we have background or outside noise. So please feel free to speak up. I won't think that you're shouting at us, but that ensures that I can hear everything that is happening. Can you hear me at the far end of the room? Yes. Okay. My family tells me that they usually don't have trouble with that. So on we go. So this is your McElhaney team. On the screen, we have a picture of I think we have 9, 12, 13 folks that will be in some way involved in this project. So everything that we learned from you today through the survey, from engagement, from the public, for all the pieces of information from all the various sources, we actually disperse that right through the whole team. So we have good flows of communication between team members. We collaborate very well, very often. And these folks have all different specialty areas. So they'll be brought in at different points of the project when we need their expert lens, the perspectives. And you'll see their expert lens in the questions that we do address in engagement, the questions that we ask you in the various sessions that we have with you. So that's how you'll get to interact with all of those folks. Most of the time, I think you'll see the 3 of us. So maybe now we could quickly go left to right and share. I think you already shared a little bit of who you are, Colton, but we'll start with you and then we'll go across and we will write our names as you introduce yourself.
Sure, thanks. My name is Colton Kursop, Senior Planner at McElhaney. I lead the planning division for the Lower Mainland, so I can draw on other resources across the company and the regions. And my favorite Bowen moment so far has been the hike up the back of the hill. Led very expertly by Sophia. And I can't wait to learn more about all these innovations. So, thank you.
So I'm Sandra Gordon. My background is outdoor recreation and tourism and conservation. So I also do a lot of engagement, and you will see me most with engagement on this project, but also in those specialty areas. My favorite Bowen Island moment happened before we got here this morning when we walked onto the walk-in area of the ferry terminal. There was a beautiful rainbow sort of landing right on Bowen. I thought, yeah, perfectly. Great way to start the day.
Hi everyone, my name is Victoria Benner and I'm a planner on the McElhaney team. I've worked mostly in land use planning, but recently been involved with a few OCP projects on island and coastal communities. So I'm really excited about Bowen because it feels like it's all part of that story. And I'll be involved with policy writing, engagement, and just helping to manage the project on the McElhaney side. Favorite Bowen Island memory, I was actually over here with a friend for a weekend a couple of years ago, and I always think of it as just this really peaceful, relaxing moment in my mind. I remember we were sitting out on the deck and we could see the water, and it's just so nice having access to this so close to the city and being able to get on a 20-minute ferry and be somewhere this special with so much access to nature. So I always think of that.
And we have one team member with us who's joining remotely. Matthew, can I hand it to you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, thanks. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So my name's Matthew Browning. I'm a senior transportation planning engineer with McElhaney, and I'm based in our Courtney office, which is the unfortunate reason why I'm not joining you today. I have a prior commitment later on this afternoon, and the logistics of getting from the north of Vancouver Island across to Bowen Island don't really lend itself for rapid movement around and double booking a day. So my favorite Bowen Island moment is yet to come because I still have not been there. I will be delighted to go visit when I can. So I lead McElhaney's transportation planning work on the island, as well as supporting on the lower mainland, and with a particular focus on multimodal transportation integration and active mobility. We just wrapped up the active transportation master plan for the village of Port Alice, and I'm particularly excited to be getting involved in some of the more unique communities that BC has to offer after most of my career spent in downtown Toronto dealing with very, very dense urban problems. It's really fun to be experiencing some of these more unique challenges, especially the interaction between sort of ferry and island life as well.
Awesome, thank you, Matthew.
Yeah, the other key feature I wanted you to know is going to happen in the background is this entire team, everyone that's on the slide, we are meeting tomorrow afternoon to share with them everything that we hear from you today, and just to make sure that they have clarity of their roles on the project. And yeah, I just wanted to put that out there so that you know that we're actively getting everyone engaged on our end immediately after the meeting.
So this slide that you can see up on the screen right now presents a little bit of the background research that we've done on the current and projected population and housing statistics. And we've done this and put this together so that we can start to understand the current and future housing needs. So the current population on Bowen is 4,650 people, and that number is projected to increase to 6,450 people by 2050. So there's 1,800 dwelling units on Bowen Island today, and by 2050, there'll be an approximate need for about 700 more units to accommodate this projected growth. We also noticed that residents between 25 and 34 and over 75 years old are projected to have higher housing needs compared to other demographics. So this just means that we want to be mindful of housing that allows seniors to age in place, and also housing that's affordable and attainable for young families and first-time home buyers. So one of the questions in the survey that you completed asked what the optional content is that the committee would be interested in seeing in that updated OCP. So before we cover those results, we just want to review what is actually required to be in the OCP. So what you see up on the screen right now is the required content for OCPs for the provincial legislation in British Columbia. So that list includes location, amount, type, and density of residential development to meet housing for 20 years, location, amount, and type of commercial, industrial, agricultural, recreational, and public use lands, location and area of sand and gravel deposits suitable for future sand and gravel operations, restrictions on use of land subject to hazardous conditions or environmentally sensitive areas, location and phasing of any major roads, sewer, and water systems, location and type of public facilities and housing policies, as well as GHG reduction targets.
Can I just ask, will we get a copy of the slides so we don't have to take copious notes that I then can't read afterwards?
Yeah, provide that. Yes, and we can also provide a link to the list of required OCP content on the provincial website. Yeah, absolutely. So in addition to the required content in OCPs, we asked in the survey what are some areas of optional policy that the committee would like to see in the updated OCP. As you can see kind of on the screen, we received a pretty wide range of responses, but the most frequent responses were reconciliation and indigenization, community water protection, housing affordability and homelessness, and on-island economic development.
So I have the challenge of unpacking this really dense slide. It has a list of the 12 OCP goals on it, and then the feedback from survey respondents in terms of whether or not they felt one of those OCP goals was met or fell short, or in the odd case, a few of them were noted as being exceeded. Just walking through, the column where feedback indicated the goal was met. The top 5 goals, for the first one, the goal that the most people felt was met is to recognize the importance of the marine environment and preserve a marine-oriented community and island atmosphere. The second highest ranked goal being met is establish a land use pattern which places high priority on environmental and social factors. And then the third highest ranked goal, having been met, was to preserve and protect the unique amenities and natural environment of Bowen Island for the benefit of Bowen Island residents and generally for residents of British Columbia. The fourth highest ranked goal, because it got 46% met plus 18% exceeded, is to ensure a healthy community with residents working together to improve the quality of life. And the fifth highest ranked goal was to provide environmental stewardship strategies to be followed by residents and visitors alike that recognize societal responsibilities as well as the rights of property owners. So those are the goals that were ranked very favorably. And then there's a very interesting feedback on goals that fell short, or in terms of, haven't been accomplished as well as the other ones we just talked about. So there's a 3-way tie. The first tie is to manage growth in a way that is conditioned by the natural environment and respects social and economic diversity. It is tied at highest unmet with to be inclusive by welcoming residents with varying income levels, lifestyles, and age groups. And then the second 2-way tie is between to foster the creation and maintenance of local employment in island-based sustainable activities, tied as the second most fell short goal with to engage other levels of government and non-government organizations to accomplish the objectives and policies in this OCP. And then the third tie in terms of unmet goals was minimize Bowen Island's contribution to global climate change, tied with to recognize Stud Cove as the commercial community heart of Bowen Island and to provide for the expansion of commercial, residential, and community and cultural uses. That will contribute towards a pleasant, walkable village appropriate in form and scale to a small community. So an OCP often has goals just like this, big picture goals. Sometimes OCPs call out only a handful of goals. They might call them principles, they might call them goals, they might call them objectives. But there's usually a handful of sort of higher order where we want to go with things. Sometimes there's a dozen of them, and sometimes there's many more. We've found the responses to this question really interesting. More people on the committee felt more goals in the current OCP were left unmet than met, but there's clearly a high number that we're also hearing were met. So this helps us frame some themes around the complexity of the OCP, maybe some comments of, some of the subsequent questions we asked help us dig more into this, and they give us more clues about why this divergence may be the case. And so we'll get into those on the subsequent slides as we dive deeper into the questions and the responses tell us more. Stay with us and see what we learn.
Can I make an observation about maybe, I think, similar to others in the room, in filling out the survey, there was some difficulty in understanding what is met without metrics and whether or not it should be met yet. And so I would hope we don't overinterpret that and that some of those things are, it would be impossible to meet them just yet. There isn't a deadline date on this OCP that says all these things must be met by 2024. So I think that just not to overinterpret that, I think would be wise for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a first blush. This is very much thematic and not super analytical at this stage. So great comments. Yeah. I think this is Victoria.
Yeah, this is Victoria. Like to drop that. Don't forget. So the OCP is a tool that can be used to implement goals or initiatives that have been identified in other municipal plans. So that's why we wanted to ask this question, which was what existing and future municipal plans does the OCP need to focus on supporting? And based on the survey feedback, the committee identified that the OCP should focus on supporting municipal infrastructure, transportation, development and housing, and sustainability. So our team will work with staff and also the community through the engagement process as well to further explore those identified areas and also how the OCP might be able to support other municipal initiatives through the OCP. Okay, so I promised that we wouldn't walk you through every question that we had on the survey. So here are some of the themes that we really saw when I stood back and looked at multiple questions. What started to emerge there? Reconciliation and indigenization throughout your answers was to be front and center as an important point. Resource management, particularly land use and water. Sustainable growth. I saw language of sustainability around service provision, the language of circular economics, on-island economics, managing opportunity, creating opportunity, lots of language around that. And then often in the same sentence, there would be something around managing transportation or incorporating transportation or understanding a transportation context. So we really start to see here where individual subjects or topics that we might come across or we might want to talk about as part of our OCP process start to integrate and cross-pollinate, right? When we're talking about transportation, we can't talk about that in a silo. We have to look at it in context with growth, with service provision, with land use and water. So this was really instructive for us in just showing how deeply things are integrated, how deeply these ideas are integrated. Also on that list, the integration of social needs, housing, sense of community was mentioned again throughout your responses in different ways. Connection, the language of connection was used a lot. Inclusion and accessibility, again, throughout the responses. And again, that's something that's a great example where every plan needs to look at whatever the subject of the plan is through a lens of inclusion and accessibility. So again, more integration of policy and understanding how these things come together. And then very salient, not to be at the bottom of the list in terms of hierarchy, but capacity. So your responses talked about a vision that suits what Bowen Island can really support. Language and sustainability and capacity were often integrated. We saw that in land use comments. So yeah, really understanding capacity. And on that note, we are going to talk, we won't talk about all the topics today, but we will specifically talk about transportation. We know this is a hot one for you. We do have Matthew on the call, so I will turn it over to Matthew to talk about some of the themes that came out of the survey and some of his perspectives on transportation. Matthew, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Sandra. I think the thing that strikes me most about this is there's clearly a real struggle for balance. It's hard to get away from the way that the main road down Snug Cove is used for servicing ferry traffic, and balancing that with the desire for that area to be the hub that it is and be active mobility focused and supportive. And those are two sort of somewhat contradictory goals to have. And so I think there's clearly been a desire to sort of have it all a little bit. And I think what we'll need to do is to establish where the hierarchy sits and where the priorities are. I think there's some really good stuff in sort of previous language about being supportive and working with BC Ferries and others on potential passenger-only ferries. And I think as a sort of a big hit item that would make the most difference to the way that transportation functions on Bowen Island, I think the deployment of a passenger-only ferry would do an awful lot, provided that you can get people to that ferry via active modes. You've suddenly really changed the mode share on the island substantially. I will say that I have in recent years worked with the Ministry of Transportation on an internal study looking at exactly that and how passenger-only ferry service might be supportive of the standard BC ferry model and where opportunities of that exist. So that is something that is being considered at the provincial level, and certainly something I think the OCP should continue to be supportive of, and perhaps with stronger language around trying to carve out a space for that. But what I would really love to hear, and I do definitely see this more of a me listening rather than me lecturing session, is to hear how those priorities are balanced in your minds. Where does the hierarchy sit in terms of specifically that area? So I'd love to hear some direct feedback on that in terms of how you prioritize.
So maybe before we do that, I'll just read out the 9 points that are on the screen. So we have balance wishes with financial resources, reduce car use, ferry and summer traffic management, pedestrian and cycling corridors that provide shortcuts, links between growth and transportation services, OCP and transportation master plan are closely linked, cross-island multi-use path should be key priority, desire for autonomy and voice, and functional partnerships and independent funding. So we do have some time. We can do this one of two ways. We could do a round table and maybe each person could pick their top 2 of those areas that would be a priority for discussion. Matthew, does that work for you?
Yeah, that's totally fine with me. I was just focusing on the one thing that struck me as a sort of outside observer a little bit as being the most transformative and probably contentious thing to wrangle. But obviously not ignoring a lot of these other issues that you just read out there in terms of the broader island and its multimodal network. But yeah, it'd be great to hear from each of the members around the room what their hot button issue is.
Sure. Let's do that. But we'll start on the other side this time.
I think number 1 is ferry and summer traffic management.
Okay.
Number 2 is ferry and summer traffic.
I share the number 1. For me, number 2 is, well, actually they're a tie for number 1, the ferry and transportation, or summer ferry and transportation, but the balancing wishes with financial resources issue.
For me, my number 1 is the links between growth and transportation services. I think it's in my mind, it's absolutely crucial. We are not in control of our own destiny as it relates to transportation, which is probably the biggest issue about managing growth, in my mind, managing growth on this island. We have lots of transportation growth. We could grow this island even with our existing transportation on the island, with all the roads. But if there isn't a ferry to match that, then we're being naive. And so I think that that is sort of the number one issue in my mind. And so I probably would put with that is that functional partnership. Our destiny depends on this company called BC Ferries. At present, unless we can change that, I don't know, but I'm not.
That's a bigger plan.
Yeah, I think that's a bigger one. But so I think that those are my two.
I think probably for me, I might say that the active transportation network would help with a lot of these issues. We have a pretty incomplete cycling network that forces people into their cars, typically one person in a car, so we're not making good use of the ferry capacity as it is. There are a lot of travel demand management things that we could do to encourage people to travel off peak. So I think that we could do a much better job utilizing the ferry. And I think that a big part of that is probably the cross island path. I think that would just be a huge game changer for the island.
Thank you.
I'm observer capacity, so it's all important to me.
I'm just gonna buck the convention and just speak to some nuance instead. I think there's a different conversation about in Snug Cove versus out of Snug Cove transportation, just because being an island with a ferry that barfs itself out in the middle of our town center is provides a lot of the strain, and it has knock-on issues like parking congestion, peak time use, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a configuration and land use issue, I think, in Snug Cove as it relates to transportation, particularly if we're looking to add density there. And the other piece, I don't know if this is links between growth transportation services or even the active transportation piece, but the big, even if, what I talk about with the ferry is that even if we get a bigger ferry and we get more vehicles to the island, I don't know if our road networks can support it. So we're built on a trunk road system. And if we get a bigger ferry, like the question then becomes, build a third lane in our trunk road to accommodate the extra vehicles that already can accommodate the bikes and cars that are using it during the peak season. So there's the long-term transportation planning in regards to a large road network, I think has to be addressed as well.
Thank you.
I've got to disagree with the mayor.
As you do from time to time.
There are several studies that have been done, and once you get outside of the cove, our road network is quite adequate for growth, which I think is what Matthew said. The arguments in the past have always been trying to move the marshalling out of the cove and putting it somewhere else in the periphery. And I could give you a binder this big with all the different plans. And the community dispute they all caused. And so the community has never really accepted anything other than what we're stuck with. There's always been a lot of pushback. There was even a plan done by McElhaney a number of years ago for ferry marshalling over in the just behind the Blue Cottage and up that way. So I guess my first question would be, are we talking about moving the ferry or keeping everything the way it is as far as ferry marshalling is concerned on the main road?
Yep.
And in which case there's an adequacy problem, because when it's overload right now, we go back past the curve on the road and people have to move. So that is a real issue. And a passenger ferry would probably help that. But So I guess my main issues is the link between growth and then the functional partnerships. And being a senior, riding my bike to the ferry from where I live in the pouring rain is not something I'm ever going to do. Me, I don't have a bike.
Thank you. Well, I don't think you really, for me, I just wanted to agree with a lot of the comments that Adam made. I don't think you can address the ferry capacity issue without looking at the other options. You don't just have to spend time just watching the ferry load. Let's just see how many single occupancy cars are going. So I definitely share that feeling that we don't use our capacity efficiently. And I also think that one of the other things I wanted to mention was the development of on-island services. We just recently, I think we're going to get a new dental facility on island. So I'm curious, like, how much of that will that remove from people just doing that single trip? So exploring what else could we explore to reduce the demand there? And I really see a lot of potential in electric bikes. If you just see just how many youth are picking up electric bikes, you know, the 16s, and it just gives them so much more autonomy. And the impact on that is that you've got parents who aren't driving down to the ferry 2 or 3 times a day, like I'm doing at the moment, right? So even just small shifts like that, I mean, I think, yes, it's not conducive for all households on the island, but for some, and we're just looking for mobile shift. The other important bit I always find, and it's always an impediment for people to get on the water or to use speed walk on, is the options you have out of Horseshoe Bay. So as much as I love this talk about, you know, independence, we are dependent on those service providers, but if they could get better integration at Horseshoe Bay. Personally, over the last 10 years, I've organized our whole family life about the 257, you know, because it is quicker for me to get to an orthodontist appointment by bus, you know, if I can time it right. But if I have an appointment, you can hop on the bus, do the appointment, and get back without being held up in that sort of peak time. So that's why I think the innovation comes in looking at things creatively. That's my.
Betty, before we go to you, I just want to make sure, Matthew, are you hearing okay?
Yeah, this is great. I'm furiously taking notes, although I know we're recording.
Awesome, as are we. All right, Betty, let's hear from you.
Well, I actually agree with Andrew. I think he nailed a lot of the issues we have. And I feel that none of those are silos. They're all interrelated. So I'm actually on the transportation committee, and we recently completed the active transportation plan. And much as we would like the multi-use path to help us get people out of cars, it's extremely expensive, and engineering wise, it's very challenging. And then we have a whole nother piece of it that is pedestrian pathways, possibly bikeways. For example, I live at the bottom of Bowen Bay Hill, and there's a privately owned piece of land that everybody cuts through from the bus, would be Bowen Bay Road to Adams Road, and it connects two fairly large communities. But those kind of situations are all over the island, and often they're privately owned. And we don't really have a criteria in our active transportation plan for making proposals for where we need robust pathways to connect our active transportation MUP. And there's the fact that our bus is unreliable because it's connected to the ferry schedule. And so you'll be out there and the bus is off schedule. You see it just went around the corner. So then you have your thumb out hoping that somebody will pick you up and get you in front of the bus so that you can, it's all interconnected for us.
I'm sure you're getting a flavor that transportation's a big deal.
That's why we built a whole slide for it. This is going to be a big part of the conversation, and we're hearing that this is also a part of policy that has to integrate and play well with other policy, right?
Yes, but I really support all the comments being made, but I guess at the highest order, if I were to put priority in more of a umbrella kind of item is my agreement with Jim on the links between growth and transportation services and the functional partnerships. I think that are higher order items that can capture a lot. I happen to be very close to the bus here on the island. It really covers a very small percentage, I think, and lots of people would have to walk, and it's challenging terrain. I'm fortunate, and I do use the bus, and it does work. I also like to believe that as we move forward, and if we provide a lot more services and work towards a circular economy and have a lot more services here, that I would assume that there would be less demand to get off the island and come back, and housing affordability as well. So I think with wise land use and consideration for services, it will help counter the transportation issues. I also really agree with Councillor Morris in terms of right now we're kind of limited. Like I'd like to see more of a priority, like working with BC Ferries on a priority. Like I think residents often get attracted like transient visitors, and I really support visitors, but at the expense of residents who are trying to commute and get from their homes. But how do you stage priorities with all single line up? So stage destination.
Thank you. I think you've heard it all, but I'm definitely in the camp of cross-island multi-use path. I think if we did, and acknowledging very expensive, not an easy thing to build, but if it was truly a robust path, it would reduce car use, it would alleviate a lot of the ferry and summer traffic. Like there's a lot of other things that would be looked after if we did put that infrastructure in place. It also makes me think of, pre-COVID, there just seemed to be a lot more choice. Like I love Peter King's bus. That bus was so fantastic, and it gave you choice. You could take the 257 or you could take Peter's bus. When Mike Shannon had a water taxi, oh my gosh, he saved my sanity. I worked in Full Harbor 5 days a week. This is about you hop on, 35 minutes later, you're right in Full Harbor, like short walk to the office. And then on Fridays, as you're heading back to the island, inevitably somebody would have a case of beer. So that was such great choice. Like it's so, you could take the water taxi, you could take Peter's bus, you could take the TransLink, you could drive. But there just seem to be more choices than there are today. I think COVID really hit these independent operators really hard. So again, when I think of those functional partnerships and independent funding, I would also put that as a really important bucket, because we just naturally saw a lot of entrepreneurialism when those partnerships could be facilitated. And I also just have to say, and Adam, I apologize, but we have to remember the 257 only started to link itself better with the ferry once Peter started driving his bus. He shamed TransLink a little bit, took some pictures, kept harassing them. And that's when we saw in the TransLink schedule, before Peter King, that TransLink bus would leave 5 minutes before the ferry arrived. It was maddening. So, there's all those partnerships too, in terms of sinking and yeah, and then there's the Cormorant too, so I just think that as you're learning about Bowen Island and looking at all these transportation frustrations, I think there's also some half-baked, half-thought, almost got sustainable transportation options that are there, but not in any kind of really robust or dependable way. But all under the umbrella of, I'll say, multimodal transportation.
Thank you. Could we go to our folks online? I can't quite see who's.
We've got, maybe let's start with Fritz.
Yeah, okay. I'm always puzzled that everything has to happen in Snakov for decades, and then nothing happens. So I kind of thought it would be interesting to look at the island and for a while cut off ferry access 100%, and then see how people would use the island. Like if you would just in a natural way populate the island. So I kind of think there's all kinds of opportunities away from the cove. And as one example, with the bicycle or pedestrian corridors, if you want anything to happen in Seymour Bay for more, like say, a water taxi or so, that's not going to happen if nothing is built there. You first have to build, and then for a while maybe it's not so easy, but there has to be demand before a ferry system is in place. It's not the other way around. So but that maybe you can facilitate by putting some of these shortcuts or faster ways to get from Seymour Bay, not with a car, but with an electric bike or so, to the cove. Now suddenly they're much closer together. And I kind of think that if there's a pedestrian ferry now, it will go to Snow Cove because that's where the demand is, not to Seymour Bay. Because how does most people get to Seymour Bay? So if you want to create more options, you have to be proactive. I think that's what I'm saying.
Thank you, Fritz. Councillor Jurgensen?
Okay, so I think definitely accessibility and transit go hand in hand. I think I'll start there. I think I don't really have much to add on what everybody else has said because there's a lot of great things that have gone around the table already. But definitely the reliability and the frequency of the service do definitely hamper movement around the island for those who cannot do not have the option of driving or biking across the island.
Thank you. Back to Matthew.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and there's obviously some repeating themes, and I think everyone appreciates that when you are talking about a multimodal transportation network, the way that these things interrelate to each other can be highly challenging, and there's no real silver bullet solution necessarily, but there's a multi-pronged approach that's necessary. One thing I'd be interested in, just given that you've been completing the active transportation plan, and I know there was a transportation plan from sort of 2018, I guess, looking out to 2038. So there's been these transportation plans, and I just wonder what in the OCP do you feel has been holding up progress on the transportation plans, or potentially not supporting them sufficiently, or not giving a sort of latitude for those plans to move ahead? Are there any roadblocks in there that need to be unblocked? Are there any sort of additional objectives, policies, strategies that you feel need to be included in order to enable some of the plans that have been identified in these other supportive transportation documents? Because we certainly want to make sure that we're facilitating things that have sort of been through a process and been agreed and recommended, and we don't want to leave those sort of high and dry.
We'll open the floor.
I would say, I don't know deeply what's in the OCP already, but I don't think they're out of alignment. I think that the plan came out of the OCP and that our sort of deadlining to get it done was to open up opportunities to apply for funding from sources, because that's where our real block is we don't have the money to implement things like our multi-use path. So I think we have those ducks in order. You were on the committee before me.
Yeah, I think the transportation plan was done after the current OCP. So I think the new OCP needs to take into account the transportation plan, because there was a lot of innovation, a lot of change. A lot has changed since the current OCP was made. So things like electric bikes, multiple, all that language wasn't really around, I think, when the current OCP was put into implementation. So I think this is a good opportunity to link the current work that's been done on transportation with a new OCP or an updated OCP.
Yeah, certainly things like e-bikes. I know they were something that in sort of like the previous iteration of lots of these types of plans, maybe 5 years ago, there were something that was a sort of a strap line, maybe a throwaway paragraph or bullet point about being supportive of e-bikes. I think now it's becoming very clear that they're going to play a very prominent role in the future of multimodal transportation networks, especially in a community that likes to be active, and especially in aging communities as well. And I haven't seen too many policy documents that do a particularly good job of providing any kind of supportive framework for those. So I think that's a real opportunity to do something quite innovative and leading on that. So that's a really good point. So we'll have to obviously make sure that we're revising things in a way that is in alignment with what the transportation plans have said. So that's great.
Awesome. Thank you, Matthew. I think we'll leave it there. Don't worry, we will come back to this as a conversation in our council workshop, and you'll see this page as well.
Thanks.
Thanks, Matthew. We wanted to dedicate a whole slide to this. This is an incredible accomplishment. Great news for Bowen Island. We are looking forward to hearing some of the background on this and some of the experiences that led to this moment.
All of your consultant time.
Yeah. My initial research did indicate that there are many layers to this story, but this is very cool from a land use perspective, from a policy perspective. So we just wanted to acknowledge that this has happened and congratulate you on this purchase and this, yeah, it's happening in your community. I started my career working for a land trust, so this is a very meaningful moment. Okay, here's more of the feedback that we heard in the survey around refreshed policy, improving success for the goals not yet achieved. So I'm just going to read out what's on the slide. Now, these are quotes from your responses. Actions that council may include in their strategic plan. Goals are very subjective without metrics. Refreshed policy could help to refocus current priorities. More specific, measurable, actionable goals will be helpful. Redefine what Bowen wants to be in 10 years. Strengthening the work already done and creating new opportunities for community building. Here's some of the feedback that we received around your future document. Things you would like to see in your future document. And again, I'll read what's on the slide. Much more concise and in sections. Make navigation straightforward, well illustrated, concise, and easy to use. Recognition of the need for sustainable, clean water. Addresses affordability and climate change. Shorter, less like regulations and more realistic. Helps Bowen Island municipal staff rather than making their lives harder.
That must have been Daniel.
Yeah.
He's anonymous, right?
Supports accessibility, disability rights, and housing, along with fostering a community spirit and affordability. So again, we can see these themes right throughout the responses. Some of those will play into the process, some of those will play into the content, and some of those will play into the way that we design the document. So we're going to spend the next part of the meeting talking a little bit about the process that we will go through with you. And the first, when I asked in the survey what you needed from the process, these are some of the words that we heard: respected, collaborative, authentic, consensus, ruthless prioritization, sense of belonging, efficient, confidence, community's interest, productive, inclusive, informed, and innovative was, again, a salient topic when we asked this question. And I've included our email addresses on this slide. We will circulate them widely. We would like to make this process as inclusive and accessible as possible. So if you have any accommodations or needs that we can meet, we are here to do that. Please feel welcome to share with us how we can help you specifically. And really reach out anytime if you have that kind of feedback or you notice something in the process that we can do to support. Okay. So on the slide, we have a graphic on the right-hand side that shows the relationship of communication between the municipality, McElhaney, and the steering committee. And we will have collaborative communication between all three groups. So we will have regular meetings with the Bowen Island municipal staff. Those are more project management style meetings. We'll use a SharePoint as a document storage so that there's a central location for that documentation and things are tracked and organized well. And then we have 5 meetings with this group. Colton's going to walk us through an updated project timeline and start to put in context at what points we will have to connect where engagement sits. So Colton, over to you.
Thanks, Sandra. Yeah, so we just updated the project timeline to acknowledge our start here in the last week of October. It actually gives us some really good benefits in terms of where public engagement period land on the calendar next year. They're in times of the year that are, I think, probably more effective for meeting people where they're at. But I'll just quickly give you an overview of the project phases. So the first phase is about project initiation. After today's meeting, our team will undertake further background review, complete an assessment of the OCP and its accomplishments, as well as a policy by policy sort of like high level assessment of like, you know, is this policy clear? We'll work with staff to understand it. Has it been effective? Has it been implemented? Is it something that needs to stay on the books? Do we want to word it differently? Those kinds of things. Our water resources group will also do a high level infrastructure review to just have a good understanding of what capacity exists in infrastructure to support growth or not. And we'll also be initiating our base mapping. All of this goes into a baseline findings report, which we'll bring back to the steering committee, as well as an engagement and communications plan. So our next meeting is still in phase 1. It's at the end of phase 1, where I think the next slide talks about that, but I've already kind of let the cat out of the bag. We'll be talking about what we've learned and where we need to go with communications and engagement. The second phase of the project will unfold in the spring and summer of next year. And it's about gathering ideas and exploring options for the new OCP. So it's our first big, broad engagement. Will be both in person and online. And we'll really be trying to understand what are priorities, what's the vision. Those two things especially, like what is the vision for the 20 years ahead? What are the priorities? And that will help us identify key components for the new OCP or the OCP update. We'll of course wrap that all up in a summary of what we heard report, and we'll be able to speak to at the end of that process the draft vision, some draft goals, and some emerging policy options. The third phase of the project is taking place in the summer through the winter of next year. And over the summer, we'll be drafting first an outline of the OCP. It's really a wireframe that kind of highlights all the chapters, all the subsections within a chapter. And once we get agreement and alignment on that, we then move into drafting policies. So it's a little bit of an iterative step-by-step process. We'll have a technical memo on the island's ability to service growth or ability not to service growth based on that infrastructure review. And then we'll prepare public engagement materials to support conversations about the draft OCP, because we obviously don't want to just put the draft document on the table or on the website and say, what do you think? I mean, we'll have to have a process that's informative and that really just highlights, you know, what people need to know about this. And we really want the feedback because it will help us refine it and iterate again before moving a draft towards a council meeting. And the fourth phase of the project, it's really about finalizing. So it's about final refinements. It's about responding to the legal review. A legal review will be undertaken by a lawyer. And so we'll make sure that everything is tidy from a legal perspective. There's also some external referrals to manage and then again respond to before advancing to public hearing and final adoption. So that's the project at a high level. In terms of checkpoints with this group, we've identified again, 5 meetings, 2 in this phase, and then 1 towards the end of each phase or in advance of important public-facing moments in the project. So we intend to be working collaboratively with you as champions of the process. We see you as local context experts and community advisors. And our next meeting, we anticipate to be an extended workshop format where we present some of those technical findings of our review, as well as that high-level infrastructure assessment. And we'd like to work out the details of an engagement process. You know, we'll have some very high-level ideas, but we really want to drill down to the actual actions that we think will work best in this community. And then go from there in terms of delivering and designing the public engagement approach. And so that's how we anticipate working with the committee. We might not have that right, so we're curious to know what your thoughts are. Does that process sound reasonable?
I'm assuming some of this can evolve if things change, et cetera.
Absolutely, we're not locked into that. Evolution is something that I usually encounter in official committee plan processes. Yeah.
You mentioned a draft engagement strategy. Did you say when we might be able to see that?
Yeah, our anticipation will be that that's something we'll be working on this fall. I think the next OCPSC would probably be in January, so I would love to have that to you a couple of weeks ahead of that meeting, so that there's time to absorb it, and then have a conversation about your thoughts on it. Yeah.
Just because I think I've certainly never done it before. I'm not clear where reconciliation fits into all this planning.
I like to think of reconciliation as a lens of understanding, and indigenization as the actions and places where we look at the structures that we're building. And we look at them through that lens and we think, how can we indigenize this process? Are we being inclusive in this process? Have we looked at all of the different perspectives and voices and included those voices that need to be here as part of this process? So it's a touch point at many different points through both analysis, writing, building, and application. In terms of where we document that and where we explain and share and set that sort of stage, usually that's located in an OCP document towards the beginning, with some sort of description of relationships and specific local information that would need to be included for context. Does that help?
Anybody else have thoughts?
Well, you can make.
I was going to say it also depends on the nature of the municipality's relationship with First Nations. So if there is an established channel, good communication or an established relationship, touch points and outreach to First Nations at the beginning of the process is usually recommended, best practice. And then respecting their feedback, whether or not they want to be involved, whether they see this as something that's of import to them. They also might not identify the entire process as important to them, but just a couple key aspects. So it's an interesting, it's something we have to be flexible about.
I think I've asked this before, but do we have any budget for capacity funding to do engagement with any? Isn't there island trust for money? Well, there's the government funds that you can get from the province as well.
Community forums.
Yeah. We
saw Daniel with his hand up there.
I think I'll say I've had many meetings so far with Squamish staff just about this OCP review, keeping them updated on where our process is. And trying to invite, where they would like to see themselves in this process. We had discussions about the community funding, but couldn't get an application together with their approval by, I think it was a September deadline, so there's another one coming up. So we have that dialogue and we anticipate capacity funding as part of their engagement.
Yeah, just around engagement and consultation with the nations. I know we did have a meeting with the Islands Trust and we did get a confirmation of how many nations we would be reaching out to cue off this process. And sorry, it's just not it's not clear to me sort of who is then taking the lead with First Nations engagement and consultation around the OCP. Is it Bowen Island staff? Should we have just an intro letter coming from mayor and committee to the various nations, just to introduce the fact that we are looking at this process in its early days, and just to let you know it's early days, and put the right contact information, and even if capacity funding is something that the nation identifies that would help really focus on being involved in our process, that could be a conversation we have. I'm just sort of going back to my time working, engagement and consultation with nations in British Columbia, just starting with a very simple letter of introduction early on, just to advise what we're doing and where we are in the process, I think is really helpful. We don't have to have everything all baked and we know everything before we reach out. And so if that's something that is kind of a gap in our process at this point, I would really like to suggest that that's an outreach that we queue off sooner rather than later.
Gonna go Shannon and then Calvin.
I echo all the sentiments that have been raised here, but I don't think we answered Betty's question. And Betty, I think the way to put this is actually the journey. It's a journey and it's not a destination. And that Kirsten's comment is actually, it's necessary. If we truly respect First Nations here, it starts with a letter and opening up that engagement and or leveraging, as Colton said, existing channels of communication that we have. So that's the starting point, and to reach an FPIC is undefined. But we are starting a journey, and this is a great tool in which to start it.
I just wanted to clarify which nations we are required to consult with.
I think according to the land use database, I think there were 7.
Okay, because that's, I'm finding a bit confusing, because Squamish, as far as I know, is the only one for terrestrial.
So,
and maybe Halkavita and Sabletooth and Musqueam for waters.
So I think this is just referring to the database that looks at strength of claim. And so, to your point, the Squamish Nation, I would imagine most likely have the most active history and are probably closest to a nation that we would work closely with, less so than maybe some of the coastal nations that are based in Vancouver Island, possibly. But we don't really know, I don't think, until we queue the process and sort of invite the nations into our process. It's relationship building, really, is what most of it is. It's relationship building and understanding as we look to our own land use and our own practices around marine conservation, looking for that guidance and that historic knowledge, making sure that that is reflected in our future vision for the island.
Yeah, and the feedback you are likely to receive is it's great to hear that the municipality has already opened some channels with Squamish. That's the one that is the most proximate and kind of the most organized. You will hear differing levels of feedback from different levels of First Nations. And some of them will probably just say thanks for letting us know about it. But it is something you can't assume that they don't want to be involved. So that's why it's great to just open the door and make the process known to them and let them respond as they wish.
Right, although I'm gonna jump in here because I think there is also a difference between the consulting and asking the First Nations how they would like to be involved versus the actual policy development that the municipality is making. So if we go back to one of the earlier slides here that points out what needs to be included in an OCP, way back at the start. So all of these things around land use, water, location and type of public facilities, et cetera, as well as the OCP content that's not necessarily required. There's been work done on this stuff across the province. So other municipalities have taken this on. You've seen protocol agreements between municipalities and First Nations. The province has weighed in very strongly with the legislation related to DRIPA. So what I would offer is that given that council's direction to the committee and even in the scoping of the consultants agreement was to take into account the lenses of reconciliation, take into account UN Sustainable Development Goals, take into account circular economies or donut economics, whatever it is. That reconciliation piece has things that we can develop in terms of policy that goes into an OCP that we don't necessarily need to wait for First Nations or don't need to get them to vet. So from a, I won't speak to council specifically beyond saying that's what the sort of the terms of reference stated, but from the mayor's seat, I think there is work that can be done that enshrines best practices, that enshrines reconciliation on a policy level within an OCP, and some of that will be innovative. So, you know, for example, when I spoke to the Ministry of Indigenous Reconciliation, there's not another municipality in the province right now that's explicitly looking at reconciliation as part of their OCP. So that will need to be some of the innovative work that comes to bear on this OCP in particular. And I guess what I'm saying at the end of the day, it would be when we do go to consultation and we are keeping First Nations abreast of what's happening with our OCP, it would be great to have some of those policies written as opposed to, we haven't even really thought about it. Here's what our OCP says. It's standard, just like everybody else. What do you think? And they'll say that's fine because that's what everyone else is doing. So I would like to get out ahead of this. And I think there is existing work already done within the province, within the nation that can be brought to bear on the conversation.
Could we start with a hybrid approach though, or could we use a hybrid approach where we start with, this is what we're going to do? And we'll get back to you when we have a draft, we have, because I think it'd be really important to not just proceed in a way that's indistinguishable from we know what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, and given from a provincial context, like with DRIPA, like every piece of legislation in the province is going to eventually be aligned with DRIPA, and eventually every OCP will also need to be aligned with DRIPA. So, you know, it's not saying that we have to get it perfect with our OCP at this standpoint, but we can certainly, you know, turn our attention to it and do some best effort on it.
I think what I'm hearing David say, correct me if I'm wrong here, is that, I mean, the value of getting out very early, I think is very well known in any consultative process. But what you're saying is go a little further, because I think especially if we're being forthright about our intent around our terms of reference, et cetera, to be very clear that this is not going to be, we do not want this just to be another boilerplate OCP as it deals with reconciliation and Aboriginal issues, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, we can say that. I mean, we may fail, but at least our intent around that is an indication to the nations that, you know, this is how we want to approach this.
Yep.
And if we give as much notice around that, I think it enhances the process.
Sorry, as an observer, I just, I think when you're engaging with First Nations, sometimes that human touch goes a long way, and a simple letter, like, this is our process, how do you want, like, oftentimes those get shelved, or you don't get the response you need, and sometimes they're viewed as a cold boilerplate outreach. So if this is the intent of the committee, then I think you really need to think of the types of forms of communication that First Nations preferred. And we went through corporate Indigenous training last week, and the presenter spoke about some of those things, right? And based on my experience with Seychelles on Sunshine Coast, is that, you know, sometimes letters are not received too well. It's that kind of reaching out person to person that would be more effective as a first step, or a combination of both.
I think that's what the committee was saying, and Hamilton referenced that to use the existing networks that are already in place, but a follow-up documented through a formalized process.
I think the as well with that though, It's not going to be cheap. I mean, we're talking how many, 7 nations, et cetera, and being able to do that and have the resource to do that. You just need to be realistic around what the municipality can do and not do and put the priorities around that. So, I mean, I think in a perfect world, I think it's interesting to see this kind of conversation evolve around this table compared to conversations I had around this maybe 10 years ago, where it's pretty universal that we all have our heart in the right place and want to do the right thing here. And if we are, then doing it the right way, it is that developing those relationships, take resources and time. And we know that we are on a timeline here. And we also know we have finite resources, so we kind of have to find the right mix and balance for that.
You might find initially that it's 7 in your mind, but often there's experiences that some people say like, you know,
Right.
we're going to defer to Squamish on that, and you might find it's only really 2 at the end of the day that you're focus on and work hard.
Sure. And then sometimes they come out of the woodwork in ways that you didn't anticipate, as I have had experience in the past. But yeah, you definitely have to do it. And you find the balance. I mean, obviously we're doing 2 things. We want to do the right thing. We want to develop relationships. We want to use this as a platform to do that. We also know we have legal obligations and we're going through a legal process of developing an LCP and what we will need to do in order to get that approved.
I don't know the details, and it would be worth, but the minister refused to sign the 5-year plan for the for the Islands Trust Conservancy because it didn't have detailed expectations and plans in terms of working with First Nations. So that's the legal consequence, it seems to me. There's also a list of competencies that have been developed by one of the ministries that we're including in the job description for the new CAO that are very detailed and expansive. And I think that we need to figure out if the staff to staff relationship is, the start of a continuum. And one of the comments that was made by one of the Ministry of Municipal Affairs staff at UBCM when we met with the Islands Trust was, and we were asking for this letter for the province to review all of the Islands Trust, was that one of the models at the end of the continuum is Haida Y, where they've taken over all the responsibility for land use planning. So if that's where we're going in terms of co-governance, then we have to figure that out in terms of our planning.
I think this is all sort of leading to the bigger question is how is the municipality wanting to manage their Indigenous relations? And certainly as a committee member, we can give some advice. We can certainly flag, opportunities for us to reflect truth and reconciliation in the final OCP. But it sounds like what we're leading to is at the end of the day, who owns the relationship with the nations, who is really responsible for that outreach. Because it's not just an OCP thing, it's a continuing working with the nations, it's relationship building. And this is really just the start. So it kind of begs the question, how does this local government want to handle Indigenous relations? Is it an in-house thing? Is it a consultancy? Is it staff? Is it elected? But I think as we all know, and to your point as well, that we know nations are really, the process is that they themselves are becoming their own land use authority, their own municipality, so to speak. So as this grows and as this develops, how then do we want to manage those relationships? So that's the bigger question. Wish I could make that, doesn't sound like there's maybe an easy answer, but I think that's sort of the bigger question that I think needs to be answered for this committee to make any, I think, bona fide recommendations on those steps.
Right, and just from the mechanics of an actual OCP itself, there's different ways to thread that through. So that'll be some of the work for the committee and the consultants is, do you want to approach those reconciliation questions within the plan at a policy by policy level, or would you like to have a separate section of the plan that relates to reconciliation and the municipality's aspirations for developing protocol agreements, whatever it is?
With all due respect, though, we can't say that this part of our process and our operations reflects truth and reconciliation, and this one will not so much because we don't have resources. You know what I mean? Or this one we do, but this part of our operations doesn't. Maybe it requires for the municipality to just take a step back and look at things holistically. And then also from a tactics point of view, figure out, where do the actions lie? Who holds, at the end of the day, who's holding the accountability for the relationships and making sure truth and reconciliation is reflected in all that we do.
And so for a number of every OCP I'm working on with different clients, the output and the input with First Nations has been different. And so we really, we'll need to have a conversation about what makes sense for Bowen Island. I'm working up north where an OCP, it was very important for them to have an introductory section that explained the relationship of the First Nations and how the municipality is located within this First Nation territory, and they wanted it written in by the First Nation. And so a lot of the energy, I should call it that, was oriented around opening up the right channels, finding the right people in the Fort Nelson First Nation that would be willing to work with municipal staff on that written component. And I've worked with some other island and Sunshine Coast municipalities to sort of identify what was the content that they felt they wanted First Nations feedback on. And so it was a little bit more narrow. It wasn't like the whole OCP. It's like we have some specific areas that we think make the most sense. And we've also had the conversation where how can we support the municipality with some of the written outreach. I've always advised the client verbal is great. First, leverage any open channels that you have because the written approach tends to fail the most frequently. And then I've also worked on behalf of Musqueam, Squamish, or Tsleil-Waututh, and sometimes they just say, "Yeah, good to know it's happening, but it's not a big one for us."
And I was going to say, I wouldn't be surprised if that was the feedback we got from most of the nations, and maybe the Squamish Nation will want to be the most engaged, but we don't know. We don't know until we reach out. And I agree. Verbal, but also written, not just verbal, not just written.
I think I just would like to very much agree with everything that Kristen's saying, and in particular, like the urgency maybe to understand what BIM is doing broadly, and then because these nations are getting these inquiries from all levels of government, for all different types of processes and projects, and they're incredibly strained as well. So if we meaningfully want to engage with these nations, like I think Jim is right, like there's definitely going to be resources that are going to be required from BIM and ourselves to facilitate that. And I think understanding that sooner than later is probably really important.
Yeah, no, Kirsten, that's exactly the question, the comment was going through my mind before she started. So wholeheartedly agree. I think there's sort of a continuum and municipality, and that's, I would suggest the council has really got to be keepers of the relationship to some degree. I think we also want to make sure that their input is integrated into this process. I think the key question is initiating. What's the initial contact, and let the First Nations kind of dictate then how they want to get in. So I think there's some uncertainty, as everybody's saying, but I think the critical step is making that initial contact. I personally, just offering that view, is that it should involve representation of council, representation of the committee, with an option more likely in secondary meeting with an option of consultant being a listener, because ultimately they need to integrate what is heard and what is received into a document. So maybe there's some benefit of listening in, but I'd really suggest a fairly rapid initial outreach. My experience has been, because of conflicts, that they do nations that do appreciate the virtual meetings, so that's maybe a way of facilitating something easier and quicker. Really, it's their choice, either in person or virtual, but representation of both council and community is.
Great. Not seeing any further discussion.
Okay, so just a few words on next steps, and then we have time for some open dialogue or questions and answers, whatever whatever the room has for us. So after the kickoff meeting, we've had the request to share the slide deck. We will absolutely do that. We'll accompany it with a set of minutes and the anonymous survey findings. And then now it's going to get to work doing a more fulsome review of the OCP, its accomplishments, and a bit of a policy by policy review. I have already read through the whole thing from front to back. I think there's some great content in there, so I don't think you need to reinvent all the wheels. So I'm looking forward to actually, getting to some more definitive results. The infrastructure review will also be something that we get started sooner rather than later, because there's a lot of back and forth around getting the right information to start that process. And then we'll summarize our findings in a baseline findings report. And then, as I said, I think those two last boxes, well, all of them really lead into a bigger workshop with you at the earliest possible date in the new year. So I think that's everything in terms of what we wanted to share. And can have an open conversation now.
Looking at the last page of the agenda, public engagement, optimal timing, April, May, and September, October. I was just curious as to why you left out July and August in our summer population.
It's a great question. I mean, we have a kind of what are we trying to say? We have a timeline that we want to be able to effectively accomplish the project within. I look at the spring as being a great time to get local input and being able to have those conversations. If we extend engagement activities into the summertime, it does just push the timeline out on the project a little bit, which is not to say that it's not worth doing. If that's what you want to have happen and you want to get visitor perspectives, or you want to be at a particular event in the summertime, that's completely feasible. And there also might be like mini engagement opportunities in the summer on like something specific, rather than the whole thing, that could be kind of ongoing while we're working through that production process in terms of producing a draft.
So are you envisioning the same engagement? I've got a cold too, so sorry about the stuffy voice. April, May, and September, October, or would one feed on the other?
The first engagement process would be broader. It would be more open-ended in theory. And it's really to feed into like, what is the vision for Bowen Island 20 years hence? What are the key issues that this OCP needs to address? So it helps establish a bit of a framework. And then using that information, we go into a process of drafting the actual plan. So the September engagement is providing that draft plan back to the public for reaction and improvement.
And if there's public engagement events, would you be wanting our presence at those meetings?
I would love it if you were able to sort of think of yourself as a champion, letting people know that they're happening, that they're great, that you might have had a hand in designing what's going on. And certainly everyone in the room is welcome. Everyone on the island is welcome at the engagement events. And talking to you later on about how I know volunteerism is a big thing on Bowen Island. What's the role of volunteerism in the engagement process? I'd love to think about that too.
I think it would really increase public buy-in if members, not everybody obviously, but if members of the committee were available at those sessions, so that you could have the unofficial quiet conversation afterwards, or now that I know you're doing this, maybe we can talk about this.
And help getting the word out. So most of you are probably involved in other things on the island, whether it's activity groups or volunteerism in other spaces. So just helping us to share when there are events coming up or there's an opportunity for online engagement, just getting that word out. If you have a weekly or monthly meeting, being able to share the details at that meeting is very helpful to get wide distribution of the information, but there's a participation opportunity. It's very helpful.
Just more of
I
a
have a
question.
question. Okay. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I have a question here. I just wonder, as a follow-up on this meeting, is there a place where we can, forward our either question, comments, or ideas to? That's kind of one, I guess. Because what is the homework? We have to do homework, right? So what's the homework that you suggest that would be useful to prepare for the next meeting?
Did you hear that, Sandra?
I refer to it. Google Connect is going to take some.
So I think I heard, is there an email where events can, or sorry, where input or questions can be sent? So we do have our emails on this slide right now. We can include them in the minutes so that you have them to click on and or type out. Second part of the question was about homework. I don't have any homework out of today, but I think there will be homework in as we get through the process of reviewing the OCP and we have some technical findings. We'd love to be able to get that to you, as I've mentioned, at least 2 weeks before the next meeting. But maybe just thinking about, if you want homework, thinking about engagement, things that have worked well on Bowen Island, thinking about things that haven't worked so well, and worked in other island communities, and they say, please don't do what BC Ferries did. Yeah, helping us with those thoughts might be useful right now in the near term. Yeah.
Yeah, a few things there. I think, appreciate the ability to be able to send you comments, but I think we, as a consultant myself, I really appreciate that you want to get part of the stuff and then need an expectation that you have to respond to each individual request for comments quickly. So I think as committee members, we need to respect some of the time and expectation. You said you've already read the document, which I'm sure you did. Cover to cover, you feel that there's some good stuff in there. I'm curious, we as committee members, we've got our own thoughts and opinions on the document. There was I think, a general feeling like it's a pretty lofty document and not overly clear and concise, which is my personal feeling. When is the time when you sit silent in sharing your views on the document and let the committee and the process validate your impression of it, or do you share your views up front in terms of what's great about this document or what some of the issues are, so that we can work together in correcting them?
Yeah, so there will be a process where I look at it with our team, we'll look at it with the lens of, first of all, like the legislation. Is it compliant? Are there some specific gaps relative to the legislation? Because we will obviously want to provide you with something that's legislatively sound. But then there's the qualitative lenses that a number of the questionnaires and your comments just now alluded to, which is there's some overlap. There's some things in here that aren't clear. And so we'll identify that as well from a qualitative perspective. And we will provide that to the committee. And there will potentially be things in there like for questions we'll have from Daniel and Sophia. It's like there's something in here and we need to understand how it's been working. Like, has it been effective? Like the density transfer. I'd love to know if that's a system that's like robust and well backed up, and is there a bank of density? Has it been used? I have so many like planner nerd questions. We'll get to those as well. But yeah, we will provide an actual output. It's both a sort of a black and white technical aspects and then a more qualitative.
So is that a phase 1 exercise?
Yeah, that's a phase 1 exercise.
just for the utmost of clarity as well, like we will have OCP steering committee meetings outside of the 5 that they will be attending. So there will be other meetings where this committee can come together and discuss, just in case that was.
And we might be
clear.
able to get some of those
Yeah.
documents to you sooner than January.
Exactly, so that January is not the next time that this group will meet or that ideas can be shared or discussions can be had, and they can all happen throughout that process as well.
Melanie and then Shannon.
I think Sophia may have answered my question. I was just curious of when we would be able to touch base again. Today, we were able to sort of have a sort of touch base on 2 topics, First Nations and transportation, but there's some other big topics out there. So Sophia, are you hoping though that will be a chance where the committee can explore those, or is that, where does that fit in?
We have our next meeting booked already. Steph, do you?
November
Oh my
26th,
goodness.
I remember. It's November 26th.
Yeah, so if we want to, if anybody has ideas, we don't have an agenda yet, we don't have a specific topic, so we can take some of that feedback on board as well. I don't know if Daniel has any thoughts on that topic yet.
No. Do you have a December meeting? Or, no?
We haven't done the
I'm just thinking about what we might provide for 6 if anything. It might be the sort of review for legislative compliance. That would probably be a quick one. I'm just not sure if I would get through all the sort of qualitative side of it, but I think we could have something for that meeting.
That would be good, because then it'd be a way for us to coordinate like one response back to you, as opposed to you send something out, and you get 10 different emails, people saying, oh, think about that.
Any other questions?
Maybe, I know when I looked up at the word cloud, one word that this group talked about when it was first formulated was transparency. So I think to Adam's point, it's unclear to me what the action is coming out of like an engagement plan. There's a lot of folks with a ton of engagement experience here, but also residents. That, to your point, Sandra, that we could leverage that if we can see a plan, we can sort of mock it up, but also be there and coordinate our own schedules around that to support the process. I think that's why we're all here. And then secondly, I don't quite understand the action out of the conversation we had, Melanie, on First Nations. And I don't like, there's obviously a time sensitivity to this given the time frame. And so I don't know where we're going to land with that and whether we need to wait a month for that. So I just want to put that forward, that maybe we can act outside of like our monthly meetings to support the bid and staff in actioning that. And then lastly, one item that Betty and I chatted about offline was limiting conditions. This is a planning document, so I'm always going to jump up on the soapbox and talk about where are we putting infrastructure, and before we start thinking about the 6450 number in 2050, which is pretty alarming in terms of, do we have the capacity to actually do that? I don't know. I don't have that question, but perhaps there's lots of folks around the table who can help us understand. Do we have the capacity to be able to support that?
Yeah, I agree. Infrastructure's big. I'm just going to throw out here a suggestion, like to your point. I know we've sort of talked about like developing a relationship with the nations and how it fits into the OCP. If I can maybe just throw out a suggestion, I'm happy to draft a very short 1-page letter, like a sort of template letter, let's say, to the nations. Have it be from you, from the mayor, copy. Copy sort of staff, but also have a contact with the OCP. Maybe this is a letter that's jointly signed. I'm just going to throw out sort of Betty's name here because I think your engagement with nations, but just to be, it's a draft introductory letter just to advise that we are working on our OCP. This is our intent with the OCP. We're looking for guidance in terms of how to work with the nation. That capacity funding is something that we can talk about, among other things. And I'm happy to sort of just draft a letter to kick this off for everybody to look at. At least it's a starting point. It would be great if the phone was picked up and just to talk to, I would say, with each nation's CAO. Just to say a letter's coming. We're really looking for guidance on how to engage. But the phone call's been made and then the letter is out, and then maybe at our next meeting then in November, we can see what feedback we've received.
Yep, yeah, we can definitely look at that. I would anticipate that it's almost entirely going to be Spanish related. And then there are meetings that we're due to have with those with that nation coming up as well. So I think anything that we can do is helpful. And then, also just to frame the conversation, I think the relationship building piece is one part of it. So, and to the extent of this committee, we're not empowering nor asking this committee to go out and be responsible for creating relationships and managing relationships with First Nations. And the policy development and planning is also somewhat separate to that. And there can be initiatives that we take as a committee to implement best practices into that planning and policy making exercises that can also be brought to the nations down the road. Okay.
That's an action item for Kirsten then?
Yep.
I have homework. Yes, we have homework.
Fritz is jealous he didn't get homework, so maybe you can pull him into that conversation as well.
First kick it.
Okay, just being sensitive to time, are there any other questions for the consultants?
Yeah, one last question. It is an ambitious document. Is there anything that scares you in what we're embarking upon? And anything we're not asking?
Do you want to take that?
That's the.
Yeah. No. Because I think we can look at, it's about framing. I think when we bump up against something that makes us go, ooh, that's a good thing. It just means that it's something we need to look at more closely, look at the different perspectives. Draw on, remember, we're 3 plus Matthew online today, but we have a whole team of people with subject matter expertise, a ton of experience behind us. So it's just a moment that means that you need to look for the right person and the right group, the right people to help inform. Yeah, moment. Anything else? Fine. Good shot.
There's all kinds of things in planning that scare me, to be honest. So opposite of what Sandra said. But what I love about working with a group like this is you're also here to help us through that. So having your deep knowledge and your closeness to this community, I think will set us up for a very successful.
Great. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Well, I'm not sure. So meetings that still are in a formal meeting that we need to close. So let's do that first. Just one update on our agenda, 5.1 business arrest for minutes, official community plan steering committee chair discussion. Maybe less of a discussion, but next meeting we will open with an election of the chair. I think that this committee, the ice has successfully been broken. That is the sharing of diverse views and opinions across the table. I think it is an optimal time for this committee to select a chair. So we'll open the next meeting by doing that. So give some thought to who you'd like to be as a chair. If you're interested in being a chair, you can step up for that. And with that, information items will be received by unanimous consent. I'm assuming there's nobody here for question period. Nope. And I'll look for a motion to adjourn. So okay,
It's already passed.
age before beauty. All in favor, raise your hand. Say aye. Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Do you have business cards?
Thanks, everyone.
There.